Plot armor. It's a problem, and today we're going to talk about it. Now, spoiler warning for literally all of Game of Thrones, and if you haven't watched Game of Thrones, just skip season 8. Don't. Plot armor, otherwise known as character shield or script immunity, is when a character essential to the plot is protected by means so unbelievable that we see right through the story and catch sight of the author or writer's hands protecting that character from harm. This usually happens when a writer wants to put a character in a hopeless scenario, but they write themselves into a corner and are unable to write themselves out without resorting to deus ex machina or crazy coincidences or outrageous luck. Think scenes of battle where weapons are flying everywhere and seasoned warriors are dying left, right, and center, and yet the limp noodle-ass protagonist walks right through the midst of it and then walks away with a couple scratches. Now, plot armor can manifest itself in a whole range of ways.
The eagles are coming!
We have previous unknown or unexplained magic, the power of love, sudden onset villain stupidity, appearance of characters or cavalry not foreshadowed, unexplained technical failures, and intervention of a magical deity, which, fun fact, is the origin of the word deus ex machina, but I covered that in a whole ass video, which I will link in the end cards, so no spoilers. Now, there is some confusion surrounding the usage of this term. Some people will use it to explain any occurrence of a main cast member surviving throughout the story where real world odds probably would have had them die. So keep in mind that whenever I reference plot armor, I am referring to scenarios that break suspension of disbelief. Also worth noting, plot armor is not the same thing as the nigh invulnerable trope, which is where a character cannot be harmed due to canonical invulnerabilities that follow in-universe rules. Also worth noting, there is a trope called reverse plot armor, otherwise known as plot-induced stupidity, which is when a character loses a battle they should have won or fails to unrealistic levels because the plot needed them to. So what's the threshold for plot armor? When it comes to main character survival, the audience is primed to forgive all but the most egregious cases. Something that often goes by the name of the theory of narrative causality, did I spell it wrong? Which states, amazing things don't happen to the main characters because they're main characters. Rather, they're the main characters because amazing things happen to them. If they weren't remarkable people with remarkable feats and tales to their name, there wouldn't be a story about them and you wouldn't be hearing it in the first place. So where do we cross from accepted storytelling standards to plot armor? We often think of in-universe rules as covering things like technology levels or magic, but the truth is these can extend much deeper and cover things like realism or the grittiness levels that the story upholds. An even bigger issue than having plot armor to begin with is having a lack of plot armor and then adding it in later on in the series, because that makes it feel like the laws of the fictional universe are being violated.
Stop! You violated the law.
And so just as in Fullmetal Alchemist we accept the law of equivalent exchange, in Game of Thrones we accept as law that if a character makes mistakes, that character will be punished for them. It wasn't that Arya survived a stabbing with basically no issue that was the problem. Rather, it was that Talisa died almost instantly from a wound very similar to one that Arya was able to overcome with a cup full of drugs and a good nap. I'm not saying a good nap doesn't have some pretty curative powers, but that was an awful lot of stab wounds. And some of these in-universe rules are ones that the writer might not even realize that they're making. For example, the balance between the cost applied to main characters and villains, or main characters and minor characters. You don't have to kill one main cast member for every villain you kill or for every side character you kill, but you can't kill off side characters and villains left and right and not throw at least one main character to the wolves every now and then. Because every bad guy or side character you kill establishes that this is a world where characters die.
Your friend's dead, and Merentrant's not, because Trant had armor.
So in summary, there are too many variables to establish any true threshold, and the subtitle of this entire section was a lie. You're welcome. Okay, so we can't let a protagonist die the second they end up in a hopeless position, but we also can't let them run around rampantly flaunting their invulnerable bits in the faces of everyone around them. Because here's the thing about not only plot armor, but just in general keeping characters out of harm for the duration of the story. It sets a precedent and tells the audience that there are no stakes and thus there's no reason for tension. Well, here are some different ways around that. Number 1. Never use Deus Ex Machina or coincidences to get a character out of a hopeless scenario. Because the second you do, it becomes something that the audience knows is a tool in your arsenal that you could pull out at any moment. And generally speaking, most audiences will then default to assuming that that's what you're gonna use in a hopeless scenario. Method number 2 is killing a few Ned Starks. By destroying a character that we assumed would have plot armor, you tell the audience that no one is safe. Also worth noting, killing one essential early on does not give you a free pass for the entirety of this series, but if you make that death mean something, this can be a really good way to add tension to later scenes. Next up, skills and foreshadowing as well as cause and effect. Completely hopeless scenes can have believable write-arounds. A solution rooted in skills or cause is a solution that we can forgive as an audience. Next up, we have costs beyond life and balancing extremes. Because we care more about the main cast members, we'll generally weigh their losses with some bias, so we'll view a villain losing their life as roughly equivalent to a main cast member losing their arm when they always prided themselves as being a great sword fighter. So take something away from them that isn't their life. This is a good rule of thumb anyways, as a main character's decisions cannot have weight if their mess-ups don't impact them. But this is also how you keep your main character around while leaving them as naked as that day that you wrote that one scene that's basically fan fiction and will probably never end up in the book, but sometimes you read it just because. So if a character gets away with a slightly unbelievable survival, just slap them across the face with the loss of the stone of forgetting or finding or fucking or whatever the hell they spent the entirety of the story looking for. So anyway, consequences. The options are endless. Basically look for something your character holds dear and then take it away. Bran climbs up the wall against his mother's wishes, he falls and becomes crippled. Arya takes a life out of line, she goes blind. Tyrion pushes things a little too far, he gets a sword to the face and is permanently scarred. By comparison, we have Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2, where we have an epic, gory battle and there's deaths and there's heads coming off and it's gone. And there's no cost. And don't do that ever. So in summary, it's fine that Jaime survives until the end of the series. It's not fine that he decides to charge a full-on freaking dragon, and then Bronn shows up at the last minute, manages, despite being exhausted, to push him into the water, and then haul his heavy armored ass out of the water, and then nothing is lost and all is fine and they all go home. Now they could have gone all in and had Bronn die, or Jaime die, but even that wasn't necessary, and they could have instead written it such that Bronn or Jaime had to remove his armor because it was too heavy and it was pulling them down, and the expensive armor and his sword and maybe even his metal arm had to be abandoned to sink to the bottom of the river, never to be seen again. Or maybe Bronn had the gold on him and he had to let it go in order to be able to save Jaime, showing his choosing friendship and saving someone over money, which would have been a great beat to his arc. Anything really that would have made it feel like something was lost because of that decision would have strengthened that scene. And then to add insult to injury, in those final seasons, many of the characters saved by plot armor then fell to the wayside, where their death could have had more meaning than their life ended up having, which made it feel like a waste. In the midst of the battle with the Night King, Jon chooses to leave Sam in the middle of an unbalanced fight that should have led to Sam's death. I know, I love Sam, but as a writer, it would have been a consequence to Jon's decision to leave him. I didn't believe you all when you talked about season 8 and I went and watched it, and I have regrets. If you too have regrets, Tim over at Hello Future Me did a video on rewriting the battle with the Night King that is freaking amazing, and I will link that in the description. And in the end cards, this wasn't supposed to be a video about Game of Thrones, but here we are. So apparently that was it for this video. I'll put all the links in the places, push all the buttons, do all the things. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.